Some fathers get the phone call that cracks their world in half. I got a text message. 4 words. And those 4 words cost my daughter everything she thought she was entitled to. Let me tell you what it feels like to build a life with your bare hands for someone who ends up looking right through you. It feels like standing in your garage on a Sunday morning, holding a box of your daughter's old soccer trophies, wondering exactly when the little girl who used to fall asleep on your shoulder became a stranger who doesn't bother to return your calls. That was me, 63 years old, retired after 31 years as a pipefitter for the city of Indianapolis. A man who crawled through crawl spaces in January and breathed asbestos dust so his daughter could go to a school where the classrooms had heat. My name is Frank Dolan, and this is the story of the day I finally stopped being a safety net and started being a man who respected himself. But before I get to what I did, you need to understand who I was, because none of this makes sense without that. My father came home from Vietnam in 1971 with both legs and none of himself. He sat in a recliner for most of my childhood, staring at a television that wasn't on. My mother worked double shifts at a dry cleaner on Meridian Street until her hands cracked and bled every winter. Nobody ever handed us anything. I learned early that love was something you proved with your body, with your time, with the calluses on your palms. So when my daughter Renee was born, I made myself a quiet promise the night I brought her home from the hospital. I wrapped her in that yellow blanket my mother had knitted, stood at the window of our little house on Emerson Avenue, and I swore to her, and to whatever was listening, that this little girl would never know what it felt like to go without. She would never wear shoes with holes in them in December. She would never eat cereal for dinner because there wasn't anything else. She would know, every single day of her life, that someone in this world had her back completely. I kept that promise for 32 years. And then, on a Wednesday afternoon in March, my daughter sent me a text message that changed everything. It said, "Stop reaching out. We need space." That was it. No explanation. No phone call beforehand. 4 words sent from Nashville, Tennessee, to my phone sitting on the kitchen counter in Indianapolis, Indiana, while I was in the middle of reheating leftover soup. I read it 4 times. Then I set the phone face down on the counter, and I stood there for a long moment with my hand flat on the tile. My wife Linda was in the living room watching her show. I could hear the television through the wall. I didn't say anything to her right away. I just stood there and felt something very old and very deep shift inside my chest. Here's what you need to know about the weeks before that text. I had been trying to reach Renee because of something specific. Something that wasn't me being overbearing or hovering or whatever word she used when she talked to her friends about her father. 6 weeks earlier, I had co-signed a loan for her. A personal loan, $38,000, through a credit union here in Indianapolis. She had called me herself, asking for help. Her and her boyfriend Marcus were starting what they called a lifestyle brand. Candles, skincare, that kind of thing. She had a whole presentation, numbers, projections, a business name. I sat at the kitchen table with my reading glasses on, and I listened to every word. And because she was my daughter, and I had promised her a life without shortage, I signed. The loan agreement required annual income verification from both parties. The credit union had been sending notices to my mailing address for 3 weeks. I needed one piece of documentation from Renee, a simple earnings statement to satisfy the compliance requirement. Without it, the loan could be flagged as in default. I had called twice, left voicemails both times. Then I sent a text asking her to call me when she got a chance. "Nothing urgent," I said. "Just paperwork." 4 days later, she sent me those 4 words. Linda found me still standing in the kitchen 20 minutes after I'd read it. She looked at my face and set down the glass she was carrying. "Frank, what happened?" It wasn't a question the way she said it. 29 years of marriage does that. It turns questions into statements because the person who loves you already knows something is wrong. They just need you to confirm the shape of it. I showed her the phone. She read it. Read it again. Set the phone on the counter so carefully it didn't make a sound. And then she looked up at me with an expression I had never once seen on her face in 29 years. Not anger, not sadness, exactly. Something quieter and more permanent than either of those things. She knows about the paperwork? Linda asked. She knows, I said. I left 2 voicemails. Linda nodded slowly. She picked up her glass, walked back toward the living room, and then stopped in the doorway. Without turning around, she said, "Then she chose this, Frank. On purpose. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark next to my wife, listening to the house settle the way old houses do. And I did what fathers do at 2 in the morning when something is wrong with their child. I ran every possible version of this in my head. Maybe something had happened between her and Marcus. Maybe she was embarrassed about the business not going the way she'd hoped. Maybe I had said something, some clumsy thing the last time we talked, and I didn't realize it had landed wrong. I am not a man who expresses himself perfectly. I know that about myself. Linda has been translating me to the outside world for almost 3 decades. But by 3 in the morning, I kept coming back to the same thing. She had seen my name on her phone. Twice. She knew why I was calling. She knew there was a deadline attached. And she had waited 4 days to respond, and when she did, it wasn't to call me back. It was to tell me to stop reaching out. On purpose. 32 years of trophies and tuition and a co-signed loan sitting in her bank account, and she sent me 4 words on a Wednesday afternoon. I want to stop here for a moment because I know some of you listening right now have lived some version of this. You've sat in a quiet house, wondering what you did wrong. You've gone back through years of memories looking for the moment you made the mistake that cost you your own child. And I want to tell you something I wish someone had told me that night. Sometimes there is no mistake. Sometimes you loved someone as completely and as honestly as a human being is capable of, and they still looked at what you gave them and decided it wasn't the right shape. That is not your failure. That is theirs. But I didn't know that yet on that Wednesday night. I was still trying to find my own error. Linda and I talked at breakfast the next morning. Real talking, the kind where nobody performs, and nobody protects anyone's feelings because the situation is already past the point where feelings are the most fragile thing in the room. "What do you want to do?" she asked me. "I want to understand," I said. "Then call her." She told me to stop reaching out. Linda wrapped both hands around her coffee mug and looked at me straight. "She told you to stop reaching out, Frank, not to disappear entirely. You have a legal obligation attached to that loan. You have a right to make one more call." She was right. I called that afternoon from my truck, parked in the driveway because I didn't want to have this conversation in the house where Linda would hear every word and feel every pause. Renee picked up on the 3rd ring. That surprised me. I had been prepared for voicemail. "Dad." Her voice was flat in a way that immediately told me she had rehearsed this. "Hey, sweetheart." I kept my voice steady. "I got your text. I'm not calling to argue with it. I just need 5 minutes about the loan paperwork. The credit union needs the earnings verification, or they're going to flag the account. I need you to either email them the document or give me permission to speak on your behalf. That's all." There was a pause. And then she said something that I have thought about every day since. "Marcus and I talked about it, and we've decided we don't want the loan anymore. We're pivoting the business in a different direction. Can you just take care of canceling it on your end?" I sat with that for a moment. "Renee, I can't just cancel it. It's already been dispersed. The money is already in your account. I'm the co-signer. If the loan goes unpaid, it comes back on my credit. On my retirement." "Well," she said, and I could hear something behind the word. Something I can only describe as rehearsed inconvenience. Like I was a customer service problem she was trying to resolve. "You shouldn't have signed it if you weren't comfortable with the risk. 29 years of holding a family together. 31 years of crawl spaces and pipe fitting in February, and putting every overtime dollar somewhere her life could use it. And she said to me, 'You shouldn't have signed it if you weren't comfortable with the risk.'" I kept my voice completely level. Miraculously, I think, I kept it level. "I signed it," I said, "because you asked me to. And because I have spent your entire life making sure you had what you needed. I'm going to need you to handle the verification paperwork. I'll send you the credit union's email address." "Dad, I really think you need to respect that we said we need space." "I'll send you the address this afternoon," I said. And I ended the call. I sat in my truck for a while after that. The engine was off. The garage door was still open, and I could see the lawn and the street beyond it. The ordinary Tuesday afternoon world, going about its business, completely indifferent to the fact that something in my chest had just made a decision without consulting the rest of me. When I walked back into the kitchen, Linda was standing at the counter. She had heard enough. She looked at me, and I looked at her, and I said, "I'm calling Dennis tomorrow." Dennis Prater, my attorney. He'd handled our wills, our property transfer when we bought the lake house, a contract dispute I had with a contractor 7 years ago. Good man. Careful man. The kind of lawyer who asks you twice if you're sure before he puts anything in motion. I called him at 8 the next morning. Told him the situation in full. He was quiet for a moment on his end, and then he said, "Frank, as co-signer, you have the right to contact the credit union directly and formally request that they pursue collection from the primary borrower before touching your assets. It puts you on record, and it puts her on notice. You can also send a formal written demand to Renee, requiring her to refinance the loan out of your name within 60 days, or you'll be forced to make payments yourself and pursue reimbursement through civil court." "Do both," I said. He did. I also had Dennis pull out our existing estate documents. Linda and I had done our wills 12 years earlier when Renee was finishing college. Everything. The house, the lake property, the retirement accounts, the small investment portfolio I'd built by putting away $200 a month for 20 years. All of it was structured to go to Renee after we were both gone. Because she was our only child. Because that was what you did. I sat in Dennis's office, and I looked at those documents, and I thought about my father in that recliner. I thought about my mother's cracked hands in December. I thought about 31 years of pipe fitting, and every dollar I had ever not spent on myself because someone else needed it more. And I thought about the voice on the phone saying you shouldn't have signed it if you weren't comfortable with the risk. "I want to revise everything," I said. Dennis looked at me over his glasses, not surprised exactly, more like a man confirming a direction before he turns the car. "How much of a revision are we talking?" "Complete," I said. "Linda gets everything if I go first. I get everything if she goes first. And when we're both gone, Renee gets enough to bury us. The rest goes to the Veterans Transition Foundation." Dennis set his pen down. "The housing program? They help veterans who came home and couldn't put their lives back together," I said. "Men like my father, except they're getting actual help instead of a recliner and a television. That's where it goes." He didn't try to talk me out of it. He just nodded and picked his pen back up. "I'll have the drafts to you by the end of the week." I want to tell you that I felt relief when I walked out of that office. But the truth is, I felt grief. There is a particular kind of grief that doesn't get talked about enough. The grief of loving someone who cannot love you back the way you deserve. The grief of closing a door you spent your whole life trying to hold open. I sat in my truck in Dennis's parking lot, and I let myself feel it for about 10 minutes. Then I drove home to my wife. Linda and I didn't talk much that evening. We made dinner together the way we always do, her handling the salad, me burning the garlic bread slightly the way I always do, and we ate at the kitchen table and watched the sky go dark through the window over the sink. At some point she reached across and put her hand on mine and left it there. "You okay?" she asked. "I will be," I said. She squeezed my hand once and went back to eating. 29 years. She knew that was all I needed to say. The credit union sent Renee the formal demand within the week. Dennis's letter followed 3 days after that. I heard nothing directly from her for almost 6 weeks. Then she called on a Saturday morning while Linda and I were having coffee on the back porch. Her voice was different this time. The rehearsed flatness was gone. What replaced it was something I recognized from when she was 7 years old and had broken a window with a soccer ball and didn't know how to begin the conversation. A kind of pressurized guilt trying to disguise itself as composure. "Dad, I got the letter from your lawyer." "I know," I said. "Marcus and I can't refinance right now. Our credit isn't strong enough without your backing. If you force this, it's going to destroy both of our credit scores, and the business is going to collapse." I looked out at the yard, at the maple tree I planted the year Renee started kindergarten. It was a full, big tree now. I understand that's a difficult position, I said. Dad. And here, her voice cracked, just slightly at the edges. Not completely. Just enough to let me know the performance had a seam. You can't do this. We're family. You're punishing me for wanting some independence. Renee, I said, keeping my voice as gentle as I could, while also being completely honest. You asked me to sign a loan. I signed it. Then you told me to stop reaching out, and when I called about the legal paperwork, you told me I shouldn't have signed it if I wasn't comfortable with the risk. I didn't stop loving you when you sent that text, but I did stop pretending that my name on your debt is something separate from my life. It isn't. It never was. She was quiet for a long moment. I need you to help me fix this, she said finally. I know you do, I said. And I think that's the first honest thing you've said to me in a while. I need you to start making the payments on schedule. Every one of them. On time. If you do that for 12 months straight, and the account stays in good standing, I'll revisit the refinancing conversation with you. But I'm not pulling Dennis's letter. And I'm not backing down from what I've started. Another silence. Longer this time. And the will? She asked. She had spoken to someone. Someone who had told her to ask. I didn't ask her who. The will is done, I said. And I'm at peace with it. I heard her breath catch on the other end of the line. Dad, you can't be serious. You're leaving everything to a charity because of one argument? It wasn't one argument, sweetheart. My voice stayed level. I wasn't angry. I want you to understand that. I was clear. There's a difference. You watched my name come up on your phone, and you chose not to answer. You knew there was a deadline, and you let it pass. And when I finally reached you, you told me I shouldn't have signed a loan that I signed because you asked me to. That's not one argument. That's a pattern. And I've been ignoring that pattern for a long time because it was easier to keep your life smooth than to ask you to be accountable for your part in it. I'm not doing that anymore. She was crying by the end of that. Real tears, the kind that have weight behind them. And I want to tell you that it didn't move me the way it once would have, and that surprised me more than anything else about that whole conversation. Not because I didn't love her. I loved her exactly as much as I always had. But somewhere between that Wednesday text in Dennis's office and this phone call on the back porch, I had stopped confusing love with permission. I think you should take some time, I said. Think about what you actually want from a relationship with your father. Not what you want from my credit score or my signature. From me, as a person. And when you have an answer to that, I'll be here. I ended the call. Linda was watching me from across the porch table. She hadn't heard all of it, but she'd heard enough. How do you feel? She asked. I thought about it honestly for a moment before I answered. Like somebody opened a window in a room that had been shut for a long time, I said. She smiled at that. Small and sad and real. Months have passed now. The loan is being paid. Not by me. By Renee and Marcus. On schedule. Every month. Because the alternative got made very clear to them. I check the account status the way you check a smoke detector. Not because you expect a fire, but because you're a responsible person who understands that some things require regular attention. I haven't heard from her beyond one short text around the holidays. It said, "Hope you and Mom are well." Linda and I talked about whether to respond. We decided together, the way we've made every decision in 29 years. And Linda wrote back, "We are. Take care of yourself." That was enough. For now, that was enough. The lake house is quiet in the mornings. Linda makes coffee, and I take mine out to the dock, and I sit there and watch the water do what water does, which is reflect the sky back at you, and ask nothing in return. I think about my father sometimes out there. I think about what his life might have looked like if someone had handed him the thing I spent 30 years, trying to hand my daughter a sense of security so deep and so consistent that he never had to feel afraid of what the next month might bring. He never got that. Not from his government, not from his country, not from anyone. There are men out there right now, veterans, who came home from places I can only imagine, and they're sleeping in their cars or losing their housing, or trying to rebuild a civilian life with tools they were never given. When Linda and I are both gone, every dollar I earned in those crawl spaces and pipe tunnels is going to the people who need it most. People who would give almost anything to have the kind of safety net I spent 30 years holding over my daughter's head without her ever looking up to notice it was there. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I said it with bitterness for a few months. Now I say it with something that feels closer to purpose. Linda came out to the dock one morning not long ago, brought me a second cup without my asking, the way she has for 29 years, and she sat down in the chair beside me, and we watched the water together without saying anything for a long time. Then she said, "Do you think she'll come around?" I thought about it. The maple tree in the backyard, the yellow hospital blanket, the promise I made at that window on Emerson Avenue. "I think she'll figure out who she is," I said. "I hope when she does, she wants a father in her life. I'll be here if she does. And if she doesn't?" I reached over and took my wife's hand. The same hand I've been holding since a rainy Friday night in 1996 when I walked her to her car after our third date and she turned around and looked at me like I might actually be worth the trouble. "Then I'll be here for you," I said. "And that will always be enough." She leaned her head against my shoulder. The water caught the morning light and threw it back at us, wide and easy and indifferent to everything that had happened and everything that might still come. I built this life with my hands. Every dollar of it earned in the dark and the cold and the tight spaces nobody else wanted to work in. I built it for a little girl who I thought would always know what that meant. She may not, but I know. Linda knows. And somewhere out there, a veteran who came home with nothing is going to know too, someday, in ways none of us can fully predict. And that is more than enough for a man who started with nothing and chose to spend his life making sure the people he loved never had to say the same. If this story moved you at all, hit that like button and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. And if you've been through something like this with a child, a sibling, anyone you gave everything to tell me your story, I read every single one. I'll see you on the next one.